welcome to episode 3 of the Zag Talk podcast. Again, I'm Brian, and I'm joined by Dylan.
Hey.
And Carson.
Hey, everyone.
And we have a lot to get to today. First, we're going to talk about the game just now against Northwestern State, get some rapid reactions there, followed by a recap of the Iowa game from Saturday. Then we'll talk about the Gregg news and wrap things up with a preview of our matchup with Virginia this coming Saturday. Right now, we're recording at 8 p.m. on Monday, so we're missing the Bachelorette right now. So without further ado, let's get into it. Maybe, Dylan, why don't you kick it off? Help us understand what happened in that game just now.
Yeah, for all of you that might not been able to catch that game on TV, as Root Sports is not available everywhere, hopefully you're able to get a link to a stream, whether legal or not, somewhere to be able to watch the game. It sounds like there was also some issues with the audio quality, whether there was some or not, and maybe some people were a few minutes behind, maybe even some people hosting this podcast. But this was really our first bye game, as they call it, of the season. Pretty easy win from the terms of the score at the end of the game, 95-57. We actually do play this team tomorrow night as well at 6 p.m. It's a weird back-to-back situation. We have a lot of guys getting bench minutes. Strother, Harris, Ballo, all played really good minutes, Cook as well. And I think this is really a first look at what our WCC games might look like as far as competition for when we really pull away from some of those weaker teams in the WCC. And I think it was really great for a lot of the bench guys to get some minutes. Anybody else have some highlights from the game before I talk about some of the individual stats?
I've, like you said, a low light. I have beef with Root Sports and Stadium because Stadium Stream is god-awful and Root Sports really needs to get some streaming options because you got to be able to watch some games, that and Mariners games. But other than that, no, not a whole lot.
Unless you got the mean combo of Wave Cable and Root Sports as part of your cable subscription. Yeah, not a lot of options to watch the game. Luckily, the KHQ website at least played the game or streamed the game, and we were able to catch it. But as you said, Dylan, I mean, it ended up being a blowout. So yeah, help us understand some of the individual performances.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit of a slow start for Gonzaga, but really started cooking in the second half. I would say some of the standout performances on an individual perspective. Anton Watson, I think, probably finally had the confidence game that we'd all been hoping he would have. I think the two highlights for me, he had a drop step dunk that I think looked really phenomenal. He also had a great steal at the top of the key in the second half. Pushed it out to Strother, who finished with a dunk. So he finishes with 15 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists. I think that's a quality game from him. I think the only thing to note there, he was out of the starting lineup in the second half. They replaced him with Nembhard, went with the really small ball lineup with Kispert at the 4 and Timme at the 5. So I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I do think kind of have to take it with a grain of salt in that this is the first game of a doubleheader. We're going to see some weird lineup combinations coming out of halves, guys getting different amounts of minutes over the next couple of games, with the exception of Virginia. I think the other couple notes, Kispert had 2 24-footers to start the game, finished with 27 points, one shy of his career high. So great to see him cooking still. And I think the emergence of the tricky trio in our first bye game. Dom finished with 10 points, 2 threes, 2 of 2 from 3. Strother finished with 8. Tricky trio is officially here. The other third part of the tricky trio, Suggs, had a pretty good game. I would say for me, takeaway, probably a little bit too aggressive. He had 2 offensive fouls where he pushed off. I've seen him do that in a couple other games and not get called for it. So I think he's going to have to calm down a little bit on the drives. He's a really athletic player, but I really think the outside game is benefiting him well as he hit a couple of threes in this one as well. Last thing of note from my end, Timme needs to work on his free throws. I think he was 4 of 8 from the game. However, he also needs to continue working on the stash. For those of you that were able to catch the game, Timme has an amazing stash, and I hope we get to continue that, seeing that throughout the rest of the season. Any headband watch? He was wearing his headband tonight. That's all I got for Northwest State. Unless anybody else has any other notes, we can hop over to the Iowa game.
Yeah, I guess just one last note is that we did not see Zakharov or Arlauskas in this game. Not sure if that's still stemming from COVID issues or what. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on in the second part of the doubleheader, which by the time this episode is out, we'll know what happened there. But just will be interesting to see because those guys, haven't gotten a lot of play time so far. And you would think that these would be the times for them to get in there and get some developmental minutes. But be interesting to see as we get these 4 bye games out of the way, how much they're involved.
Yeah, could be interesting. The only thing I was thinking of, I actually watched a really interesting interview with Rem and Shem the other day. Rem talking about how he played on senior night. He talked about how he played like a minute and a half and he was gassed. He's like, this is what it's like to play minutes in a real full college basketball game. So they could honestly be counting for a little bit of that. Some of these guys that got a lot of minutes tonight, Dom, Strother, even farther on down the bench, Will Graves, like those guys are going to could be a little gassed tomorrow maybe. So we could just see a lot more of Pavel and Arloskis tomorrow and maybe a little bit less of Balo or Strother or Dom. So it'll be interesting to see where we go tomorrow with minutes.
Yeah, agreed. This game was, and we texted back and forth about this. Without those 2 crazy end of shot clock threes in the first half, we would have been up by 19 going into halftime. Instead, it was a 13-point lead. Pretty sure Northwestern State was shooting 100% on those types of shots, and then shooting a much lower percentage throughout the rest of the game. So, it is what it is. But anyway, yeah, why don't we talk about the Iowa game? Because obviously, I think in terms of matchups for the start of this college basketball season, I don't know if you could ask for kind of a more exciting one. I mean, 2 offensive powerhouses, and it was a great game. It was a really, really great game. Carson, would love to hear from you, just your reactions to how it all played out, how we did, and just your general reactions.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be not happy with the result of the game. I'm personally starting the Church of Jalen Suggs, so all believers and followers are welcome. Jalen put up 27 points on 8 of 17 shooting and was 7 of 10 from 3. He was knocking down everything. Really nice step back jumper was kind of the dagger at the end of the game there. He also added in 7 boards, 4 assists, 3 steals, and a huge block that was crazy. He seemed completely out of the play, came back and blocked it, which was huge. One downside from him was he did have 7 turnovers. He's been a little turnover prone early this year, which I don't know if you can really, I guess you can blame him, but from a freshman, I think that's maybe a little bit expected. Joel Ayayi had a great game. Love watching that. That's one of the other ones we talked about before. He makes winning plays, and he was a rebounding machine. He had a double-double with 11 points and 18 rebounds, 5 of those on the offensive boards. And he did a really good job. We've seen some video breakdowns on Twitter and stuff of his high post play against their zone that got him out of it in about 5 possessions. That was a really good spot for him, both passing and just his ability to attack. Other than that, our overall depth, I think, was tested in this game because Timme and Kispert fouled out with a few minutes left in the game and were out for a good chunk in the second half. But Nembhard, as always, was strong off the bench. Aaron Cook, I think, was his best game. Coming in, knocking down a few big threes. And Balo, although he struggled defensively down that while Iowa went on that run, he by no means should be expected to guard someone like Luka Garza at this point. I think he looked good on offense. He had about 9 minutes of solid offense that game. So that was good. Overall, in terms of the game plan, I think it was great. They threw a bunch of different looks and bodies at Garza. Watson started the game guarding him. Obviously, Timme guarded him, but we were switching everything at one point, so we had guards on him. And then obviously we shut down their shooters. They were 4 of 22 from 3. So I think overall, I mean, yeah, it's a great game. It's hard to be upset about. We led by double digits for most of the game, most of the second half. So how about you guys? What are some things you maybe would have liked to see go differently in that game?
For me, as I said, going into the game, it was nice to see Balo get some quality minutes off the bench. I'm going to be a big focusing on some of the bench guys this year, hoping they start to develop. I think this is really going to be one of those development years for Balo, kind of like Rui had going into the first part of his career at Gonzaga. Wasn't what he finished as when he started. So I think that's going to be where Balo is going to end up as well. Didn't run the floor super well, but he's a big boy. He held his own against Garza in some sense. Got some great offensive boards. He played pretty well. He had a nice little jumper from the low post as well. That wasn't quite a layup, and nice to see him stretch it outside of layups. So I think that looked good. I think as a whole, Nembhard and Cook actually played great rotation minutes. I think there were a couple of things that are highlights, I think, that are going to be highlights throughout the season. When Timme's not able to grab the board, he's really good at tipping the ball out, and our guards are really, really good at coming in and getting those rebounds. It's part of the reason that Joel had 18 rebounds. A couple of those were tip outs, maybe intentional or not, by Timme that he was able to come in and get. Suggs is also great at getting those. We talked about that from the start, even in the Kansas game. He's ripping down boards. Suggs is player of the game for me. Suggs is, I don't know, flashiest numbers of the game. His shooting was phenomenal. His three-point shooting was phenomenal, I should say. But I really think team defense is the best. The rotations have been on point. We talked about the fact that if guards came down to double, they were going to have to rotate over, and they did a really good job of that. Got a couple of steals and fast breaks. So I wasn't super happy with Watson's play against Iowa, as a lot of people were even less happy on Twitter. But I do think he played pretty well. Had a couple of great rebounds down the stretch. I really think he turned it on in the second half. First half was not so great. Those were kind of my biggest takeaways from the game that haven't already been talked about.
I think that we talked about what we needed to, like the must-dos on offense and defense in the preview. And I think we achieved just about everything that we set out to achieve. Talking about holding them to just minimal three-point shooting. They shot 22 threes, which might seem like a pretty high number. But for that team, that's low. And if you actually take a look at who actually broke out for them, you had Toussaint, who scored 14 points. He's not really a shooter. He was 0 for 2 from 3, 6 of 11 from the field. Wieskamp was really the only guy who was able to produce from outside. He was 3 of 8. Carson, you said it at the time. They were 2 of 10 in the first half from 3. And what that just showed was that we were doing a really good job of getting a hand up. And again, we talked about it. This was going to be Iowa's first true test. And they had a really hard time dealing with our athletic guards. On the offensive end, I thought we did a really good job of making them not play zone. I would have been really, really worried if we weren't able to knock down some shots. But even on the possessions that we played against their zone, it wasn't always about trying to find an open three. There were a couple of high-low plays between Ayai and Ballo that were really successful as well. And I think that we just did a really good job of finding the holes in the zone and making them play man on us. And they obviously can't match up with us. Beyond that, I just want to call out something that I saw on Twitter. I believe it was Eric Shapiro. We will put the link in the show notes, but he basically had an entire thread of all the times that Iowa broke down on defense. And it was everything from guys not getting back to one guy guarding the ball and another guy not understanding that someone else was guarding the ball and trying to guard the ball too. And just miscommunications everywhere. And I think the difference between a good team and a great team is being able to take advantage of situations like that. And we were obviously able to do that, putting up 99 points on a top 5 team in the country. Beyond that, look, those are really my key takeaways. Enough cannot be said about how well Suggs played. I think that's been talked about a lot, as it should be. But overall, I was really pleased with the way that the team played on both ends. It was just a really solid game against one of the best teams and one of the best players in the country. It was really fun to watch.
I will say with Watson, Dylan, you talked about him a little. I don't think he played a great game, but I do think he was huge in this game, especially with the foul trouble. And you have Timme and Kispert out. Ballo's really not going to get any of those big minutes. He's not ready for that. And Watson, was huge down the stretch. He didn't have a lot of rebounds on the stat sheet, but he was really actively tipping. We kind of talked about that with Timme, where just active hands. He was getting a bunch of loose balls. He was on the ground, and I don't think we win that game, or at least not by the margin we did down the stretch. That would have been tough without having Watson in there, because I think Garza would have just absolutely tore us up inside. That was just my other extra note. Oh, and other than that, 18 turnovers. A lot of those were unforced. I think that might have been a little bit of a product of the break and not playing for 2 weeks, as we had heard Mark Few kind of saying that first practice they almost needed helmets on because the balls were just flying everywhere. So something to look to clean up that could come to hurt us later in the season in March, but I'm not too concerned about that.
Yeah, I think if I had to get nitpicky, one of the things I noticed a couple of times, and part of it's that we did a really good job of hedging and also coming over screens to make sure they weren't able to get open threes. But you mentioned Toussaint had 14 points. Almost all of those were drives where the big man came up, stepped around the screen, maybe hedged, the guard dropped back a little. Nobody was on the backside to help, and Toussaint had probably three or four. I think actually he might have had three in a row in the second half where he was able to get past either Cook or Nembhard, get straight to the basket and get a nice little floater or runner. So, I mean, there's things that they got to work on. As per usual, they're not going to be perfect. If we're going to play teams that are going to hurt us from three, though, that is something we're going to have to probably make some adjustments on and make sure we've got guys on the backside there that are able to make some contested plays. Yeah, that was really my only nitpicky thing. Iowa's Twitter account was clowning. They tweeted that Garza had 30 points, which all credit to him. The man was a monster, especially in the second half. He really turned it on, helped them, kind of come back into that game. But 30 points is great and all, but when the rest of your team can't produce and you can't get a W, I don't think it's all that amazing. But yeah, overall, another great quality win. 3 top 15 wins for Gonzaga. I think Richard Fox said it tonight in the Northwestern State game. Those are all three teams, Kansas, Virginia, and West Virginia are probably, or sorry, Kansas and West Virginia are probably both going to stay within the top 15. So just another quality win for the Zags.
I don't think we can move on without talking about Joel Ayayi's 18 rebound performance. Just one of 6 Zags in the Mark Few era with 18 or more rebounds. And he joins the likes of, are you guys ready for these names? Elias Harris, Jonathan Williams, Corey Violet, DeMontis Sabonis, and Josh Heidfeld. So not exactly a bunch of lengthy guards up at the top of the list. It's really a bunch of bruisers and then a Yai, which is insane. I can't, I just.
Wait, no Casey Calvary in there?
Yeah, no, very surprising to
I'm
me.
surprised by that. If I had, I didn't know the list, hadn't seen it before. If I had to guess, Casey Calvary would have been my only other name I probably would have thrown out there, but that's really impressive.
I remember seeing something on Twitter where maybe that list didn't go back through all of Gonzaga history, so there might be some missing. Casey Calvary's name wasn't the one that came up, but yeah, I would expect he might be on there. Shout out to Bellarmine Prep basketball there, Casey Calvary, back in the 90s.
No way. I didn't know that. Yeah. I had no idea.
Yeah, I even think shout out to Coach Bernie Salazar, too. I think he coached him in one of his first years as a head coach, or he might have been an assistant, but yeah, he was there.
With the likes of Carson Hollyoak and all the other Bellarmine stars.
Yeah, not sure about that. Shout out to Malachi Flynn, though. I would have loved to have him at Gonzaga last year. It was his top choice. He wanted to go to Gonzaga, but it just never worked out. So,
speaking of going to Gonzaga, if I'm allowed to transition here, do we want to talk about Ben Gregg?
Let's do it. The man is eligible.
Turned it around the other week. So he is officially finished up with high school. That came with the announcement of Oregon high school basketball being canceled for the rest of the year. Mark Few was talking on the Mark Few show the other day, or I guess today. I don't know when it aired, but talking about how, we might not see a lot of him this year. I think some people were expecting, oh my God, is he going to play today and tomorrow? No, I don't think he's going to play today and tomorrow. In fact, I think he still might even have to go through some level of COVID protocol before he can get out on the court with the guys. So we're not going to see him anytime soon. I think there's a chance we definitely see him in some WCC games, but it will be nice. 6'10", he's a polished forward. It'd be nice to have that off the bench in the future, especially if we're not going to be using guys like Arlauskis and Pavel, and probably going to be part of the reason we might see some of those guys leave at the end of the year. Any other comments on Ben Gregg, though, from you guys?
Yeah, I think primarily it's just huge to have him come in, especially for next year. I mean, you get half a year instead of playing high school basketball, which, that's a bummer. Coach Few said it, where it's just yeah, it sucks. I wish he was able to go play that because, senior year of high school basketball, they were going to have a chance at a state championship. So a lot of missed out there, but, player development wise, you're probably better off being at Gonzaga for half a year and even getting some game experience at no cost or no injury to your eligibility status. So yeah, having 6 or 7 months of work with the Gonzaga staff, getting in a college weight room, that's going to be huge for next year. And yeah, if we get in some serious foul trouble, do I potentially trust Ben Gregg to come in and give you better minutes than Zakharov might? Maybe, I don't know, but it's nice to have another option when we're pretty short in terms of depth in the front court. So I'm excited about it. It's great to have him here. I know he's always wanted to go to Gonzaga, so it's always great to add another awesome player to the team.
Yeah, it's really kind of a cool homecoming for him. I guess he grew up in Spokane. He still has family here, so pretty cool to have him back. And yeah, really no downsides of him making the decision to come early. We had an extra spot on the roster. He will have the ability to play without impacting him getting a full 4 years, which I think is, yeah, it's just the best of all worlds, to be honest. He could very well have an impact. He kind of fills that stretch four role that we have kind of been missing this year. Otherwise, it's just good to be able to have him on campus doing all the same workouts the team is doing and just building up his body, getting ready for significant minutes next year. I think the one thing that's interesting, and we're probably going to talk about this after this season is over, or maybe even as more recruiting news comes out, but we are going from a team this year that has a whole bunch of guard depth to a team next year that's going to have probably an incredible amount of front court depth. So I don't know. It's going to be really, really interesting to see. Ben Gregg is just going to be a crucial piece of that. And it's really cool to have him on campus now. So yeah, glad he's here. I'm not sure if he'll contribute in a really significant way this year. It'll be a really good learning experience for him to be on campus for the next 6 months in preparation of next year.
Young fella made himself a hashtag, which, I'm on board with Tricky Trio. I loved it. We'll see if it sticks. But his hashtag is hashtag Greggacy, which, as much as I love the pun, I don't really know if I like throwing my name in the word legacy when you haven't played a minute yet in college basketball. So we'll see how it goes for him, but that'll be interesting to see play out for his Gonzaga career.
Oh, he's a Zag for sure.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Well, let's switch gears. Virginia's coming up on Saturday. Needless to say, it will be another battle between Mark Few and Tony Bennett. People were reminiscing on Twitter about the last time Mark Few and Tony Bennett matched up, which was I believe it was a 4-point win for Wazoo and just a heartbreaker. So this will be a really interesting matchup. I think the thing that contrasts these two teams the most is their pace. It seems like Virginia is one of those teams that just wants to slow it down and control the game and play hard-nosed defense. So Carson, would really be interested to hear your thoughts about Virginia on the whole. And then we can get into their players and how they've been doing so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, kind of a quick overview of Virginia. You kind of touched on it with the pace. They've been either the slowest team or one of the slowest teams in the last, I don't know how many years, 5 years or so, if you go look in KenPom, pretty much since Tony Bennett's been there. But you think of Virginia and you think of defense. They're maybe not quite as formidable on the defensive end this year as they have been the past few years, but they're still the number 6 defense in KenPom this year. So, for example, West Virginia is number 10, Kansas is number 6, or was number 6 when we played them. So it's on pace to be our toughest defensive matchup of the year, but they've been the number 1 defense 2 of the last 3 years, and they've been a top 10 defense in KenPom each of the last 6 years, with all of those except for one being in the top 5. They're really good defensively. They have really strong principles. We'll talk a little bit about the pack line defense that they're famous for. Offensively, it kind of goes with the pace. It's not going to be the most fun game to watch. Virginia basketball is generally not the most fun to watch. This isn't the Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome. This is not that team. This team does not score like that. Most Virginia teams don't. So yeah, it's really going to be a battle. It's going to be a grind it out. It's going to be their pace versus our pace. Who can get into what they want to. They're going to make it really difficult for us to be comfortable in offense. And yeah, that's kind of the main overview before we get more into their specific offensive and defensive sets. But anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, I mean, Virginia's had a pretty decent start to the season. Kind of like Iowa, hadn't really played anybody big coming into this game. They're pending a win over William and Mary tomorrow, which I'm expecting them to get. They'll be 4-1. However, who knows tomorrow night? Their one loss has come to our WCC favorite, San Francisco. Two familiar names for them led that charge. Jamari Bouye had 19, and the man with the crazy name, Tavi Jerkatom, added two clutch threes for them. USF pulled off that upset 61-60 over in Bubbleville to start off the season. So, or I guess not to start off the season, but put a damper on Virginia's beginning of the season. Otherwise, haven't really had anything crazy. San Francisco was able to shoot the lights out in that game. They hit 13 of 28 from behind the line. So if Gonzaga has an equal game to that, that's going to be huge for us while holding Virginia to only 3 of 12. So in the one competitive game that they've had so far, Dons were able to get that win. So we'll see how we look against them. But Brian, you want to talk about some of the individual players?
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing that stands out to me, especially in their starting lineup, is their experience. I believe Sam Hauser and Jay Huff are their two leading scorers. Both of them are seniors, redshirt seniors. And Trey Murphy, Kihei Clark are juniors, I believe. And then I'm gonna butcher this. Wolda he's a senior as well. So in terms of their starting lineup, they really have the experience that makes a team like Virginia that tough. And it's not just that these folks have years of experience; it's that they've got years of experience playing in those tough games. Kihei Clark was the one who made basically the 3/4 court pass up ahead to that eventually led to the bucket that brought Virginia to overtime in the Final Four against Purdue. And so they've been in there, they've made those plays before. And so I think their experience more than anything is what will be tough for us to match up against. So even though Jalen Suggs is much more athletic than just about anyone on the floor, I'm really curious to see what they throw at him. And I'm curious to see how he handles it. Going a little bit more in depth. Yeah, Sam Hauser, he leads their team in both scoring and is tied for the lead in rebounds on the team. Jay Huff has been talked about. His name has been thrown around a little bit in the National Player of the Year conversation. I don't really think he's a big threat there, but he's just a big body. He likes to play on the perimeter though. It's really interesting. Kihei Clark, he's a game manager. He's not really going to go off on you, but he's really a game manager and is going to ensure that the team is doing what they're supposed to be doing at any given point in the game. Am I missing anything there? Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I think the only thing you missed, saw it in the notes, but Trey Murphy, the third, coming off the bench, fifth most minutes and third highest scorer. So their depth there is also good because I think you named probably all 5 starters plus one, two, three. Yeah, you named 5 starters and then him as well. So you got a good range of players there as well.
Yeah, and one thing they've kind of toyed with their starting lineup so far this season in the 4 games that they've played. I mean, Kihei Clark came off the bench one game, but he's generally been a starter. I think Murphy did start a game, but the most consistent have been Hauser and Huff have been in there every game. But yeah, they kind of toyed with it, but they have 10 guys getting at least 10 minutes of play time. So they're playing quite a few guys, but that's really it.
Yeah, I think first of all, I'll just say I'm really glad that Mark Few scheduled this game because I don't know. I know a lot of basketball fans want to see the flashy dunks and all that stuff. I think more than anything, the Zags need to play a game like this during the regular season, and I think we saw a lot. 2 years ago now, when we got into that Elite Eight game against Texas Tech, it was one of those slow it down, kind of grind it out type games, kind of similar to what we saw against West Virginia earlier this year. But I don't know if we were ready for that because we just hadn't played one of those games yet. Our tougher opponents at that time were, the Dukes of the world who do try and get out and run, who do try and just, play traditional style of basketball. Playing against this Virginia team, I'm really curious to see if we are able to push the pace. Like which team is going to be the one that dictates the pace of the game? And I think that's ultimately who is going to come out victorious. I think ultimately we will, but I think that Virginia is that type of team that if they make you play their game, they're going to be in it for all of it. So,
and they do normally make you play their game. That's something they're really good at. Even the games that they lose, it's still going to be pretty low scoring and pretty slow pace. That is a great point, though, Brian. This has kind of been known now. Mark Few's all but said it, where this is the replacement for the Baylor game. The Baylor game's not going to happen. It sounds like with Baylor having to go on to pause last week, that kind of made it impossible since they had 2 conference games canceled, and those are obviously going to, take precedence over the Gonzaga game. But you look at it, we got play the number 1 offense right now in Ken Palm, the other best offense in the country. That's super high pace. They have a great star player. You can play Kansas, who's a pretty good balance of both, but they like to get out and run, but they have the reigning defensive player of the year. And then you have West Virginia, which is one of those games that's just kind of muck it up. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be scrappy. And we've won all of them so far. And now we get this game that's going to be against a team that runs a very specific offense and some sets. And then they have a very specific defense that they run that's going to be, they slow it down and they're really good at doing it. So I think it's great. We're getting not only tests in general, but a wide variety of tests. Would love to have seen Baylor because that's probably the best test we can get this year, but that'll have to wait till later in March, hopefully.
Yeah, Baylor is that flashy game that you mentioned, Brian. I think the faster paced game. They got a lot of good guards, and they'd be able to get out and run pretty well. And I think that'd be really exciting. But yeah, I think Baylor being a defensive team. Carson, do you want to talk a little bit about what we mean by a good defensive team and what that defense looks like?
Yeah, so the defense that they run, for those unfamiliar with it, it's the pack line defense. So kind of an overview of that. It's really a sagging man-to-man defense. And what it is it's your typical man-to-man where you're putting ball pressure on the guy with the ball, but anyone else who's not guarding the ball, there's an imaginary 16-foot line coming out from the rim, and everyone has to at least be inside that 16-foot line, even if you're a single pass away. So they're not going to be denying the wings. They're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the ball, but it's a lot of help defense. They want you to drive into their defense is what they're doing, and they have plenty of help. It's tough to get it into the post. They almost always are going to send the other big or somebody else to go trap the post on a post entry. Some of the terms you'll hear a lot are, kind of the gap defense. As soon as somebody's coming at you, you're flashing at the gap, trying to stop the drive, make them pick it up, and then it's jumping to the ball. So their rotation, they have this down. It's Virginia. This was kind of made famous by them. I guess they're the most obvious team that runs it. In terms of going about beating it, their primary objective is to discourage dribble penetration and protect the paint. To beat it, you really do need to knock down your outside shots. We kind of talked about this with Iowa, where that was a huge key for us. That's going to be another huge key in this game, is we have to be able to draw them out so that they're having to come out and aggressively close out on us. You really need to move the defense with ball fakes and ball reversals and attacking dribbles. Talked about it with the zone that Iowa was potentially going to run. Brian, you said get to the teeth of the defense, but you got to make sure you're not overcommitting. Constant movements and movements with purpose. That's cutters away from the ball. It's with the ball. We just kind of talked about that. You really just need to make this defense shift as much as possible so that you're creating driving lanes that are more than just the one step away defender that's within that 16-foot line. Back picks and flare screens are going to be another huge thing for us because that's a good way to open up this defense. And USF had success when they really spread out the court and let their athletic guards kind of create and drive. So that is one place where this year's team, I think, is an advantage compared to previous years where we do have Suggs and Ayayi and Nembhard who can really spread this defense out, get some ball picks, and just take it to the hoop, create offense that way so that they're not really able to just sit in the key. And then I think reversals off of post entries are going to be huge too. Get it into Timme, turn and look to the opposite side because that defense is going to crash down as soon as he gets it. So
one thing that USF did against Virginia, at least in what I watched, I watched really, in all honesty, the last maybe 8 minutes of that game, but they were not shy about taking threes in transition. And, you'd have a guy like Bouye drawing the attention of all their defenders, and he would kick it out to Yurkatam, and Yurkatam knocked down 2 or 3 of those in a row. So I think personally what we need to do on the offensive end is basically make them kind of go in scramble mode. The more that we do that, the better off we'll be. Because if we start every possession and they're kind of sitting and waiting for us to get into our offense and everything, that's not where we want to be. We want to be forcing the issue a little bit. We want to be attacking baseline, kicking out, swing, another drive. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at with those offensive elements, Carson, and what that ultimately creates. like those pin down screens and those skip passes and stuff like that. Those are things that shift the defense and make them kind of have to scramble. So I think ultimately we are going to come out. We're going to come out victorious on the other side of this one. What'll be really interesting for me to watch is that it'll be like playing against Iowa's defense, but they're way better because Iowa forced us to shoot the ball too, and that's kind of what Virginia is gonna make us do a little bit as well, I think. And so it'll be really fun to watch. I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
They're super disciplined defensively too. I think maybe is a difference with Iowa's. I mean, they have this thing down, and especially with a bunch of upperclassmen on this team, they've been running it for 3 or 4 years. It's a really impressive defense. Jordan Sperber, if you just Google Jordan Sperber, Virginia defense, and same thing for the offense that we'll go through here in a second, there's some really great breakdowns on the different looks they get and some of the gap principles that they use in the pack line defense if you want to go give those a look ahead of the game if you get tired of your family on Christmas Eve and Christmas.
Before we move to Virginia's offense, a couple of keys for our offense. Do you think it's going to be key that everybody's able to shoot the ball, or do you think we're going to be okay with just our guards shooting on Saturday? I think one thing to note from the Northwestern State games, Watson hit his first 3 of the season for sure. I think he went 1 of 3 tonight, but his first 3 of the season. Timme has shown that he's willing to shoot the 3. How do we feel about overall shooting against a defense like this where they are going to sag inside?
I don't think the bigs necessarily need to shoot. I think one of the advantages playing against a pack line defense is getting it into the post and post-to-post passing, because I kind of touched on it earlier. A lot of times when they go, it's almost every time they're going to send a double team when it gets into the post. But a lot of times that trap is coming from the opposite post defender. So yeah, having another big out on the perimeter might make that kind of tough to have the other big come down and trap. But even if we do have Watson at the high post or anybody at the high post, it'll be pretty big to, if that person comes down to trap, just to dump over on a cut to the basket is one of the weak spots traditionally in a pack line defense. So
do they double the high post as well as the low post?
I'm not sure on that. I know, I think it's less of a rule. I know as soon as it gets into the block, they're trapping pretty much every time. High post is kind of iffy because that's really right around their 16-foot line anyway. So they're going to have a bunch of gap defenders there. So I haven't seen a whole lot of it. Haven't watched a lot of Virginia this year. A lot of this is going off past few years, but
yeah, because I think we've talked about this in a couple of games, but keys have been the high post offense we've been able to run. Carson, you mentioned it at the top of this episode with Joel being able to run stuff out of there, get shots, pass down as well. So, if they do bring up the double, that'll be key. Also, I think a nice thing out of the games tonight, just like it's nice to get in some practice at taking threes against some defense, I think it's also nice to get some practice at some post-to-post passing. Timme had at least 1 assist to Watson. He had 1 off a fast break, but I think he had also a nice, great post-to-post pass. And Ballo, who will probably get a couple of minutes in this game, although some of his passing was suspect tonight, I will say he had a beautiful pass to Watson for a basket from post to post. So I think there's opportunities, and they're getting some good stuff out of these 2 bye games back to back leading into UVA, and I think it's a great decision to schedule those games.
So I guess now turning to Virginia's offense, they have historically ran almost exclusively their blocker mover offense, which was popularized by Tony Bennett's dad. And this is a super slow offense. It's pretty outdated. The spacing concepts are not kind of up to snuff with current basketball, modern day basketball. And it's really the reason why they run so slow on offense. They're 357th in adjusted tempo in the country this year. The last few years, they've ran a little bit of a 4-out, 1-in kind of motion offense, but they've looked at a new offense this year, which they actually got from a Division III school up in Maine, which is St. Joseph's College, that they were kind of experimenting with early. They went away from it in their last game, but maybe I'll go into blocker mover first. The basic action is a wheel kind of circle action, and it's continuous. It generally starts with a flare screen and a pin down on opposite sides. And then you're going to have 2 blockers, which are 2 bigs, and 3 movers that are coming off screens and are constantly moving around the 2 blockers. And generally they're put in pairs. So you're just going to see the same guys screening and rescreening a lot, Portland Trailblazers, Terry Stotts, he has traditionally ran this, although in a much more modern way with Dame and CJ. But most of the shots are going to be created by using those pin down screens. The guard can curl, the big can pop for a three. Like we said, Huff can shoot it. He likes being out on the perimeter. If the defender shoots the gap, the guard is able to fade off into the corner for an open three. But the big downside of it, the spacing is terrible, and it kind of runs into the ground if it's not there on the first few looks, and if you're not disciplined with your screening and spacing, which this offense makes it hard to do. So that's kind of why they've been experimenting with some of the motion offenses. And this new one, it's similar to the read and react offense, if you're familiar with it, where it's a lot of players passing, cutting, and then filling those cutting spots to maintain the space. And the off-ball guys are constantly moving on passes and drives. So it's helped with the ball movement and the spacing. They've had some sets that have had some really good cuts in it so far this year. They like to start with the entry to the mid post, and they use a variety of guys. They've used Hauser, they've used Kihei Clark, who's a tiny little guard, and they use Justin McCoy sometimes too. And from there, it's kind of an isolation. Those guys look to create, and then you're going to have the cuts from the offside and a fill-in to replace there. They've gotten a lot of baseline cuts off of that for good looks. Cut underneath the basket's really a staple of this offense. So we're going to have to make sure. This is kind of where Ayayi, we've talked about in the Iowa games, where he could fall asleep, and that could be an easy bucket for them a few times. So lots of cutting that you got to have your head on a swivel. The downsides of it so far, they struggled against USF, and they haven't used it much since because a lot of the off-ball action kind of lacked purpose. It seemed they were kind of just running through. They weren't really cutting with purpose, and it didn't really create many opportunities. And then once the mid-post entry has happened, the initial cuts happen, it seems like the offense is stalling a little bit, and they get stagnant, and then it just leads to forced shots and a lot of inefficient looks from mid-range. You know, Hauser, he's good from the mid-range. Outside of him, you probably don't want people taking that shot. And even with him, it's been forced a lot of times. So I think we should expect to see a lot of blocker mover, especially with how fast Gonzaga likes to play. That'll really help to slow it down. They're going to be using the full shot clock. And the other thing with having the three movers with that is they almost always send three back when the shot goes up. So it's going to limit transition. Expect a lot of boring, terrible spaced basketball from them on offense, but same thing with their defense. They've done it forever. These guys are upperclassmen. They know how to run it. It's just, do they have the weapons to really score at the clip they need to this year?
As someone who ran the read and react offense in high school, so I'm a big time expert, guys. Trust me. No, but I can tell you that the offense doesn't work if you're not aggressive and if you're not constantly attacking the basket. And that's kind of the purpose of that offense, is to give the offense some structure when that action is happening. One of the keys that I look for when I'm trying to figure out if a team is running a read and react or a variation thereof is on a drive, do the guys that are in the corners cut to the basket on the same side as the drive is happening? And do the guys that are on that same side wing get to the corner? And if you are new to those concepts, it's really hard because you're constantly having to think about what to do. And what the offense really should be is reacting to certain keys. One of those keys is, the moment the drive happens, your body just knows where to go. And if they're still developing that muscle, as you said, Carson, I doubt it's something that we're going to see a lot of when we play against them. But that's probably why they struggled with it against USF. I mean, they figured that USF was going to be a cakewalk and they'd be able to try some new things. And that obviously didn't turn out to be the case. So
I think it could benefit them down the road. I think from looking at some of the film on it that Sperber's had too, it's looked like a good offense. I just don't know if they really have the tools to work within it right now, player-wise. And like you said, they look a little uncomfortable. I think they're still stuck in their ways a little bit with blocker mover because that's such a constant same movement over and over and over again. Another thing with this read and react type offense that they've been using is that it really doesn't utilize Jay Huff's skill set super well. Jordan Sperber pointed this out on one of his early newsletters this year. He's a really good ball screener, and that really isn't used in this type of 5-out kind of offense. And so while he can play in this offense, it's really not utilizing his skill set the best way. And then another thing too, Tony Bennett teams have traditionally been really bad at getting to the free throw line and at offensive rebounding. We talked a little bit about blocker mover being a reason why they're not very good on the offensive glass because they're sending 3 guys back. But with this new offense, they've actually been worse at getting to the free throw line and worse at offensive rebounding. So you would think the offensive rebounding would be better because they're not sending so many guys back. But free throw line, I mean, that kind of is just showing that they're really not being aggressive enough. If you're in a 5-out read and react, you should be getting to the hoop, creating contact and creating opportunities. And it just hasn't worked out for them yet this year, and it might just not be the right group for this offense.
Yeah, I think one of the big keys for this too is going to be matchups. Carson, correct me if I'm wrong. For the blocker mover, they're going to need to have 3 guards out there and 2 bigs, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think with that, we're going to have to make sure we stay out of foul trouble again. That's going to be huge against this because I don't know. I mean, Kispert's done a pretty good job defending the post. So if Watson gets in trouble, well, that'll be okay. I think we can recover from something like that. But if Timme starts to get in foul trouble like he did last game, fouls out, it's going to be tough for us to have either Watson and Kispert or Ballo and Watson out there playing defense, especially Ballo. He has shown he can be a little bit of a defensive liability. I think we're going to definitely need to be cognizant of fouls in this game, probably more than any other game we've had this season because of the matchups and the team that we're playing. So that's kind of my bigger takeaway from their offensive game.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily that we won't be able to use maybe a smaller lineup against the blocker mover defensively, but like you said, it just gets tough when we're so thin there and you really do it. Like in crunch time, yeah, I want our bigs in there, but if we need to go small ball for a while, which I'm sure we will, I think we'll be all right as long as we're still scoring at a efficient clip. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's games against Virginia, no matter what team it is, it's always a grinded out battle, and it'll be really interesting to see how our offense stacks up against it because there's pieces of it that shooting, still don't really know what to expect. I don't think we're going to be a great shooting team. We shot 38% today, I think, from 3, which is better than we were. Do I think we're going to shoot 50% from 3 again? Probably not. But, that's one way to beat it is getting them to spread out from shooting. But the other thing that's in our favor is that, we're able to spread them out with our athleticism and attacking like our drivers and cutters. So that could be in our favor. It's really just going to be which one ends up being weighted the most in this game. And hopefully we don't see Jalen like we did today, driving into a defender who's already there, which I think is something that we might fall victim to early on in this game. And hopefully that's something that's in the game plan and that they work on this week in practice is, it's not a body you can drive through. It's not just a rake down that you can drive through. They're there. This is what they teach. It's going to be a gap and they're going to make you pick up your dribble or they're turning you over. So we got to create wider driving lanes by having guys cut through so your closest defenders further away from you and just really play smart basketball.
Yeah, and I think I made a knock on Suggs earlier that he got 2 offensive fouls, kind of drove into guys and put the arm out today. I do think overall, though, despite being, this guy who's got a lot of hype around him, he's got a lot of, I would say he's got a lot of pressure on him to continue performing at the rate he's performing on at. I do think in the grand scheme of things, he's done a really great job of not being overzealous in his attacks of the rim. I mean, he's obviously been great in transition, getting, transition buckets or, as they're still getting back, even after a basket, he's done a great job of attacking the rim, but he has done a really good job of not just taking the ball from the wing and driving into 2 guys once they're in their defensive set. So I think that's going to be key for us, be able to shoot well. We've shown we've got guys that can do it, from Suggs to Kispert to Yai. Cook and Nembhard have both stepped up in the last couple of games that are shooting at a better rate than they were at the beginning of the season from outside. And Watson showed he can shoot as well today. So I think we'll be okay. I think if we can make them play at our pace, and if we can make them come out on us, and we can get at a good shooting clip at the beginning of the game, I do think I agree with both of you guys. I do think we're going to come away with a win on Saturday.
Yeah, and another thing too I know we haven't talked about Timme much in this matchup, but I'm excited to see what he brings to the table in terms of post passing in this game because there's going to be a lot of opportunities for those quick, in and right back out to the other side and some flashy passes there that, if Petrushev was here this year, I really think we'd probably be screwed in that particular area because he was a black hole when the ball went in there. So I think this is worse having Timme this year rather than Petrushev. In this matchup is going to be better for us because I do think he's a little more willing to pass it out of the post and maybe a little bit better passer just in general too. So excited to see what kind of game he can put up, because it's going to be tough sledding down there in the paint. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in the paint against a Virginia defense.
Yeah, definitely not. And that kind of leads to the question. And this question was actually posed this morning on the Ion College Basketball podcast with Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander. If we beat Virginia, are we going undefeated the rest of the way? People are talking about the WCC and how competitive it could potentially be. BYU 7-2, big wins over Utah and San Diego State. St. Mary's is 8-1. No big wins yet, but that record is nothing to sneeze at. Santa Clara undefeated 6-0, and USF obviously had the big win over Virginia. So knowing how competitive it looks like the WCC is going to be this year, is this win over Virginia, or is this game against Virginia going to be our toughest battle? And if we win, are we going to go undefeated the rest of the way?
I mean, I don't want to say we will. I think there's a really good chance. Obviously, we're going to be favored probably by a decent margin the rest of the way after the Virginia game. That doesn't mean anything. I remember Dylan and I were in Barcelona the night that the BYU game happened in 2017, and we woke up. It was 3 or 4 in the morning by the time the game ended, and we were just like, "Wait, this is a joke, right?" Like, because our friends were all texting us that we lost. And so, anything can happen. The Rui team, 2018, 2019, they lost to St. Mary's in the championship game of the conference tournament. So you never know, but I mean, it would look pretty good. I've been a little hot and cold on the WCC competitiveness-wise this year. At times, I've thought people were crazy to think that we might get multiple bids or 3 bids. And then there's times right now where it's looking pretty good, where I really don't think San Francisco is getting in, or Pepperdine. I don't think that they have the resumes to get in unless they, get a few huge wins in WCC play and make it to the championship of the tournament. But BYU has been looking better. That was a big win over San Diego State. St. Mary's has a chance against San Diego State tomorrow, I think. So, yeah, I mean, there's going to be some close games. It's going to be really interesting without fans this year, both for Gonzaga at home and on the road at BYU. But, I mean, I'd be feeling pretty good about putting some money down on an undefeated season if we get through Virginia. But you never know. I mean, it's going to be a crazy year, and we've talked about it before. You never know with COVID who isn't available for a game. So,
Yeah, I think with just that point in mind, I don't know if I'd ever put money down on Gonzaga to remain undefeated after Virginia. Do I feel pretty good about it? Absolutely. But I don't know if I'm putting my money on the line for it. It depends on what the odds are, I guess. But I think the multi-bid thing for WCC, I think BYU's definitely got a good shot if they continue at the clip they're on, even if they don't beat us either the games we potentially have against them. I think St. Mary's, looking at schedule, if they have a really, really good WCC season, maybe they're probably going to have to beat us once to try to get in. If they, have a good season. And yeah, those lower teams, they got great records now. They could continue on down the road, but I just don't see them having strength of schedules to make it into whatever tournament we get in March, April timeframe. But yeah, that's kind of my takeaway for WCC competitive this year.
In terms of WCC competitiveness, I saw something fun on Twitter today that UW currently would be the 6th best team in the WCC, and that's probably still really heavily weighted towards preseason numbers in there. So I think it's going to be worse, and I think like any other Gonzaga basketball fan, we love to see that. So especially because we were scared to play it this year,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for UW, like, there's a chance. You want to talk about us having an undefeated season? I know they got a win earlier this year. There's definitely a chance UW doesn't win another game this season. So yeah, I think they would finish quite low in the WCC. We're not a tough conference, but I think we're slowly making our way out of the cupcake conference discussion, as much as Twitter would like to call it that.
I think 2 through 8, 2 through 7 is going to be a bloodbath. I think that BYU, St. Mary's, USF, and Pepperdine are going to absolutely beat each other up throughout the season. And it's going to be kind of crazy to see what happens. We could see I think we could potentially see some other upsets as well. Portland beat Oregon State earlier this year. I don't know if that says more about Portland or more about Oregon State in the Pac-12, but it's going to be a really interesting season. My take is that if we beat Virginia, I really do think we go undefeated the rest of the way. I'm going to knock on wood, but I really don't know if, barring something crazy happen, like we shoot 1 for 30 from 3 or someone gets hurt or something like that. I just don't see another team matching up with our guards. I just don't see it happening. So that's just my
to
thought.
me, it kind of feels like WCC play might look a little bit like 2017, where we really just blew through it. Talking about bloodbath, it was really ugly. There was multiple 50 or 40 point games. I remember we beat Santa Clara by a lot. And it's been more competitive the last couple of years. Last year, there were some good close games. Obviously, we lost to BYU. I don't think BYU is as good as last year's team, and I don't think this team is anywhere close to the level, or I don't think last year's team is anywhere close to the level of this team. And it'd really have to be a tough night offensively and, kind of sleepwalking through defense for us to drop one of those games. And I don't see us really going into a game against BYU or St. Mary's with that mindset. Maybe San Francisco, they always play us tight anyway. But when you have a 0 in your loss column, you're even a little bit more ready to go into some of those games and playing with even a little more chip on your shoulder to get that done. So I'm sure this year with the way some of these games would go, there would be a lot of murmuring about the fans in the student section, but we don't have to worry about that this year.
Final question for both of you guys from me. 2 questions, I guess. Nembhard, I don't know if you guys have noticed, has changed up the hair a little bit this year. What do we like better? Do we like the mini dreads? Do we like the blown out hair a little bit more? How are we feeling?
I like the dreads more.
Oh, interesting. I'm a fro guy myself.
Okay.
I really appreciate a good fro.
I have a funny story. One of Natalie, my fiance's friends, had texted her during the game on Saturday and was just like, my husband just can recognize that one of the players changed his hairstyle, but when I do my hair, it just doesn't even notice. And I was like, that's funny because I totally noticed that he was had an afro in this game too. So
I think the hardest thing for me with that is it's a little bit harder when we get into these games where we get a little more bench guys. If it's a quick game or a quick pace play, it's a little bit harder to tell him and Strother apart. So I think that's I know the height difference and everything, but I think that's my biggest knock on it. I liked the mini dreads. I thought he looked pretty cool with those. Other question, Timme mustache. Are we fans? Does he keep it going? Do we want it to keep going?
Yeah, Sheriff Timme. I'm all for it.
My heart wants it, but my eyes don't.
my mom texted me during the game. She's a big Gonzaga game watcher, so I get lots of texts from mom during the game, and she was not loving the mustache. We'll put it at I'm all for it, so we'll put it at a 2-2 tie, I guess, if we include my mom's vote in there. So
I'm all for it if it kind of adds to the Timme hate that I'm sure is going to be there by the end of the season. Just his celebrations, he talks a lot during games, and then you throw in a dirty 1970s porn stash in there too, and that's a recipe for a lot of hate coming your way. So
perfect. Podcast vote is Timme mustache stays. I love it.
Love it. All right. Well, with that said, that's a wrap for episode number 3. Make sure that you give us a rating. When you give us a rating, it helps our ranking so that other Zag fans can find us. And with all that said, looking forward to Saturday. Go Zags.
Happy holidays and go Zags.